Just out of college, I enlisted in the Peace Corps and was posted in a remote village in the north of Burkina Faso, West Africa. The village was on the southern edge of the Sahel, an arid belt adjacent to the Sahara Desert. Villagers grew millet and sorghum in the region that received about 20 inches of rain a year in a good year. This was the limit where rain-fed agriculture was possible. My job was to help communities and individual farmers improve the fertility of their fields by building rock dikes. These dikes slowed surface water flow during heavy rainfall. I also helped with community tree nurseries and with planting trees in fields. The trees provided soil nitrogen and provided food for livestock. My work was a follow-up to an agroforestry project started by Oxfam International. The year was 1984, and for the next 2 years, the rains didn't come. The crops failed, livestock died, and people starved. I helped UN workers deliver food aid. This was a time of famine that the Band-Aid We Are the World concert was put on to provide aid to Africa. In the villages where I worked, food aid came regularly, but elsewhere many people starved, especially in more remote areas, and many families abandoned their farms and villages. As for my agroforestry work, it was challenging. In West Africa, field preparation is done in the dry season. Able-bodied men and boys were away then. They traveled far south to the Ivory Coast to seek farm labor for wages. I worked with a few men who stayed, and men too elderly to travel, children, and women's collectives. Most work was done by the women's collectives, but given all of the other labor women do, it was hard to organize too many work days hauling rocks to build dikes and haul water to hydrate thirsty trees. It all seemed pretty hopeless and pointless to me then. Colonialism and neocolonialism, unsustainable farming and forestry practices, changing climate, and population pressures. It was hard for me to imagine a positive future for the region. Moreover, at least 10 developed countries had active aid programs in Burkina, but their activities were uncoordinated, wasteful, unsustainable, and ineffective. It appeared to me that sustainable development in Africa would only happen when led and managed by Africans, addressing problems holistically and applying indigenous values and solutions. Mwangari Maathai was a Kenyan veterinary scientist whose life spanned the period of colonialism through independence and the growth of Kenya to its place as a commercial power. Dr. Maathai was raised in rural Kenya during the troubled period before independence, and in 1960 was one of the beneficiaries of Airlift Africa, or the Kennedy Airlift, which brought young Kenyans to the US for university studies. She completed biology degrees in Kansas and Pennsylvania, then returned to Nairobi, where she completed a doctorate degree and conducted veterinary research in livestock health. She was the first woman to receive a doctorate in East Africa. In the 1970s, while working as a faculty member, raising children, and supporting her then husband's political career, Mwangari Maathai became involved in a number of non-governmental organizations focused on women's rights, health, and the environment. It was during this time that she made the connection that environmental degradation was a root of the economic and social problems in Kenya. With fits and starts, Dr. Maathai initiated in 1977 what became the Greenbelt Movement. Based on her own lived experience and knowledge as a scientist, she inferred that the deepening rural poverty in Kenya was a consequence of increasing soil infertility, water scarcity, and scarcity of wood and other forest products. The worsening environment was a legacy of laws and policies that went back to the British colonial period. She was convinced that planting trees would be a simple, practical, and effective way to reduce the rural environmental degradation and therefore poverty. Mwangari Maathai created a program that paid rural people to plant trees, and she insisted that at least half the workers be women. In fact, most of the workers were women. They were paid by the number of trees that survived. So people learned to care for the trees. The trees were planted in long rows to create windbreaks and natural corridors, hence the name Greenbelt. Greenbelt Movement chapters insisted that decision-making be done democratically, with women's status and power equal to men. Some of the income from planting trees was saved in communal funds for supporting community improvements, such as healthcare clinics. Dr. Maathai used her network of colleagues in Europe, North America, and Japan to find funding to support all of this. Through the 1980s and 1990s, the Greenbelt movement grew in numbers of people engaged, number of trees planted, and the effectiveness in progressing its mission. In the movement's words, the mission of the Greenbelt movement is to mobilize community consciousness for self-determination, justice, equity, reduction of poverty, and environmental conservation using trees as the entry point. The mission statement of the Greenbelt movement and the spiritual writings of Mwangari Maathai in Replenishing the Earth closely resonate with the Unitarian Universalist 7 principles. The Greenbelt movement became, and it remains, a powerful movement against patriarchy and for equal rights and economic opportunity for women. It became, and it remains, a powerful movement against autocracy and corruption and for grassroots democracy. The Greenbelt movement encompasses the urban as well as the rural environment. It organized mass protests that prevented a park in the center of Nairobi from being converted into an office building, and prevented a forest reserve on the city's outskirts from being converted into luxury housing estates. Mwangari Maathai was denounced and repeatedly by Kenya's then president, and she was beaten and jailed several times. Yet in 2004, she received the Nobel Peace Prize, the first African woman to receive a Nobel. In her acceptance address, she said, "We are called to assist the earth to heal her wounds, and in the process, heal our own. Indeed, to embrace the whole creation in all its diversity, beauty, and wonder." She died in 2011, but the Greenbelt movement has continued to be an effective agent for environmental restoration and of cultural and political change. Reading Dr. Maathai's writings, I wondered whether, similar to the legacy of colonialism in Kenya, there are legacies of past discriminatory policies in the US that are manifest in current environmental degradation. Turns out there's many. One is the legacy of discrimination in housing. Through the 1970s, governmental and private agencies restricted loans, and realtors and renters restricted sales and rentals to African Americans and other minoritized people to certain red line districts in cities and suburbs. This maintained racial segregation and disempowered minority communities. While the practice was outlawed decades ago, it turns out that the former red line districts to this day have less green space and fewer trees than other urban areas. It makes the districts hotter, more polluted, drier, noisier, more stressful, and overall less pleasant places to live. Dr. Maathai was convinced that a community isn't healthy physically or spiritually unless the environment is healthy. Ecologists now refer to the many things that trees and nature overall provides to our physical and spiritual health and welfare as ecosystem services. People who do things to help conserve nature and the ecosystem services that nature provides are called earth stewards. What is earth stewardship? Earth stewardship recognizes that the past activities of humans and some of our present activities individually and collectively harm the health of our greater community, the community that includes our natural environment. Earth stewardship is more than recognizing these truths, however. It's about taking action individually and collectively to prevent further harm to our community and to heal that which we can. Though our North Country is far from Africa, Mwangari Maathai can inspire us to be mindful earth stewards. We can learn from her how to look at the linkages among environmental, economic, social, and political challenges, and how our small efforts collectively can result in a healthier environment and a healthier, more equitable, and more just community. The challenge for us is to look around our community and think things through. What are past legacies and current? What are the cultural, political, economic, and spiritual things that we need to address to have a healthy community? And how can we address these at the grassroots? Dr. Mwangari Maathai shows us that it may be as simple and as inspiring as a community planting trees. On this cold, snowy days of midwinter, and it is a cold one today, as we leaf through our seed catalogs, let us reflect on how we can improve the health of our community, both local and global community. Let us identify ways that we can make healthier our environment by our own direct actions. Let us commit ourselves to taking the action, even if it's seemingly minor, as planting a few trees along a stream bank to prevent erosion, or planting trees in our yards to provide habitat for wildlife, shade, and beauty to our neighborhoods. Let us support the activities of global grassroots organizations like the Greenbelt Movement. We can all be Earth stewards, doing our part to grow the global green belt of healthy communities as envisioned by Dr. Mwangari Maathai.